Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Thanks for joining me. Today, I have David Rhode as our guest. David is a nonprofit consultant and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He just recently released a book, Passion Isn't Enough, a practical guide for nonprofit leaders. It just won the Axiom Business Book Awards Gold Medal for Philanthropy. He's a former nonprofit founder, and he currently lives in New York City. Okay, it's time for real talk. Here we go. David, welcome.
Jeff, good to see you. Good to be here.
Good to see you too. Okay, you just wrote a great book, Passion Isn't Enough. I just talked about that in the intro. And let's talk about this. So you describe it as a guidebook for leaders, for nonprofit leaders. Why did you feel a guidebook was necessary for us in the nonprofit sector?
First of all, I appreciate the question and the opportunity. The need for the book, in my judgment, was just an outgrowth of the conversations that I had been having with nonprofit leaders over the last 20 years, and more specifically in the last 5 years when I've focused more of my time on CEO mentoring and coaching.
Yeah.
And seeing that sort of the same challenges and the same problems were cropping up regardless of geography or what part of the sector they were in. And so to me, I felt like the people that I were coaching, which tended to be younger leaders and smaller organizations, which frankly is what most organizations are, their challenges were everybody's challenges, but I really could only talk to so many people. Hopefully the book could talk to more people. So as a way of sort of scaling the support that I thought was missing within the sector.
Yeah. What I love about this is that if it were me, if I were a nonprofit leader, I would keep this on my desk at all times, because it's got so many things that's like, these are what I would say the indispensables of nonprofit leadership. Like, you have to have this. And like, you come up with a problem in your normal everyday work, you could just open this book because there's a chapter on just about everything, as far as all the essentials that you need as a nonprofit leader.
Well, first of all, I appreciate that. And that's the thought process. For me, this is not fiction. You don't need to start at page 1 and read to page 300. You're open a cookbook and you're going to make a dessert. You don't need to read about the chicken recipes. You go to the dessert section and you read about how to make whatever.
Yeah.
And the book is meant to be the same way. If you're going through a situation where you're adding to your staff and making hiring decisions, then you go to the chapter on building your team. And if you're getting ready for a strategic planning moment, then you could read the chapter on strategic planning, and you sort of toggle back and forth to wherever the needs are for yourself as a leader and for the organization as a whole. And, it's meant to be practical and it's meant to be accessible. I don't want to pretend that I have all the answers. I interviewed 22 different nonprofit CEOs and subject matter experts. And so while you're hearing most of the book is me and my perspective, but there's also all of these best practices and perspectives from these other professionals. And together, what we meant to do is just give leaders more confidence, more tools, even sometimes just the questions to ask when they get into situations, so they feel a little bit more secure, a little bit more confident when they approach the different elements of running the organization.
Yeah. Let's talk about your background a little bit. You owned your own business. You're an entrepreneur, and then you moved into the nonprofit space. So talk about that journey for you.
Yeah, I had kind of 3 different careers. I had a more traditional corporate consumer packaged goods marketing career, which then morphed into this more entrepreneurial career. And then I was at a point in my life, I was around 40 years old, and I don't know if it was a midlife crisis or just a moment of reflection where I said, I kind of wanted my work to mean more. Than it was. And I had been successful at the things that I had done, but I don't know that they were making any lasting impact on the world around us, if I was being honest. So that's something that I was, very intentional about. I made a pivot into the nonprofit sector. I went to the University of Pennsylvania to get a degree in nonprofit fundraising and just to try to understand more. I did some interning with an organization in the Philadelphia area just to get even more exposure. And then I launched into my own venture, founded an organization called Pitching for Baseball and Softball, which had a great run and I had a great experience leading it. And so, but yeah, it wasn't a traditional path. It wasn't something that was always there, but I was hoping that I could really enter the sector and make a difference.
I think it's interesting. So you had the successful for-profit world stuff that you did, and then I love that, yes, there was something inside of you that said, "Hey, I need to do something else. I need to do something that I feel like has real meaning." And so you went to the nonprofit side, and it wasn't like you jumped in. You first went to the University of Pennsylvania and got some, learning in, and then you started your nonprofit. And it would be great to understand, like, what were some of the early, when you started that nonprofit, what were some of the mistakes you might have made that, gosh, if I had this book, you know, I could have avoided some of the mistakes I made maybe early on and as you started it.
Yeah, when I reflect back and I wrote a business plan because I thought that's what you're supposed to do when you started things. And then I looked at it after a few years into the organization and realized that about 80% of it was like nonsense. Like it just didn't happen. There was a 20% piece of it though, which really, really landed in a big way. And so it's just funny, like what you imagine success would look like and who's going to support the organization and how it's going to grow. And some of those things really didn't happen. A whole bunch of other things did happen. And I'm excited about that. But I think the big mistake I made, and, total transparency, is I probably fell into the trap that many people do, which is my initial board was pretty much a friends and family board. And everybody was the big fans of David Rhode, which is great, and loved what I was doing and had a shared passion for the work. But I didn't really do a good job of explaining to them what the role of being a board member was going to look and feel like. We didn't talk at all about fundraising or money that they were going to need to contribute. I was a little uncomfortable around that. You don't want to ask your friends for money, whatever, all those things. So, what I wish I would have understood is I was doing both the organization and those individuals a disservice by not treating the responsibility with a little bit more professionalism and creating a clearer sense of expectations. And so, it took me sort of a 2.0 and then a 3.0 of my board to kind of get it to the point where it was really, they weren't friends and family. Then I had people
Yeah.
from Wilson Sporting Goods and people from ESPN and former Major League Baseball players and all kinds of other things that were now populating the board of this baseball and softball charitable organization, which made sense and which much more reflective of the kind of work we were doing, the national and even global scale of the organization. And then was a signal to future board members like, this thing has got it really going on. If you're trying to recruit, somebody who's a C-suite executive and they see who's on your board and it's your brother and your mom and your neighbor and whatever, like that's not who they want to, no offense, that's not who they want to associate with. They want to also increase their professional networks.
Yeah.
And that's one of the motivations for joining a board for many people. So, I really needed to rethink that because I had the right people later on, but I had the wrong people, even though they were well-intentioned initially.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. Every nonprofit starts with one person or a group of people that are passionate about something, right? And they get going and they realize, we actually need to professionalize this. And so I think for those that are listening that are thinking about starting their own nonprofit, this is a key point in all of this, is that you really need to think about this board, these people that are going to come alongside of you to help you run this thing, to make sure you have the right people in this. And it's not just about family and friends, but it's really looking at what are all the aspects of fundraising and governance, who can make connections for you. Those are all really important things to think about when you first start your nonprofit.
It is. I think the board is one of the key levers and just understanding, how precious we need to be about handing out board seats. I think one of the things that happen is, we get out there as the passionate, face of the organization. We're talking about our work and people feel that energy and they're maybe attracted to that and they want to become part of what you're doing, whatever the cause might be. And then they say those dreadful words as, I'd love to join your board. And then you,
Yeah.
are flattered by that. And you say, oh, that's great. Let's do it. And then
Yeah.
it's like, hold on a minute. Like, this is like getting married on the first date. Like, maybe we should just get to know each other a little bit better. Maybe you need to get to know the organization. Maybe I need to get to know you, where your strengths are. Have you raised money before? What's your availability in terms of time? What are your connections? How comfortable are you reaching into your own networks to bring people in? Understanding that when you reach out to somebody else, they might reciprocate and ask you to support the things that they care about. That's all kind of the way the world works. And so I think just, slow rolling the nature of building your board and how critical it is to get those first few seats right, because the way they signal how sort of like the level of seriousness and the level of professionalism of your organization that the board can really signal to the outside community. So I think the board is a huge lever and something that most of us get more wrong than right initially.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that I see repeatedly in the work that I do.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a lot of listeners who are obviously they're fundraisers. And as someone who was new to the nonprofit world and then realized you had to do the fundraising stuff, how comfortable was that for you to move into that and start asking people for money? And how did you evolve yourself around feeling comfortable about fundraising and then excelling in that?
Well, there's a couple answers. One is I don't know that I've ever gotten completely comfortable with it, and so, but I've gotten much more comfortable. And I think the key thing that I had to understand and internalize was that I wasn't selling something to them in that sense. Like, I wasn't taking money from them. I was trying to make them aware of the work we were doing and the impact we were having, and trying to understand if this was a fit for the way that they wanted to also see the world become a better place.
Yeah.
And when you can have more of a dialogue and more of a comfort zone around that, it sort of takes a little bit of the pressure off this specific ask. And so that's one aspect of it, is just understanding that I didn't need to feel all the pressure. If anything, as I got better as a fundraiser, what I did a better job of, and what we talk a lot about in the book, is just learning how to ask the right questions,
Yeah.
and getting the donor or partner to talk about what motivates them, what they care about. Then you can come back to them and say, you mentioned X. Well, we're going to be doing more of X, but
Mhm.
we also could use some support to do it. Is this something you'd like to, be involved with? And then it becomes a little bit more of a match. You're helping make a match versus you're trying to land the fish and bring them into the boat.
Yeah.
Sort of that picture. So I really just became better at asking questions. And I think the best fundraisers do a good job of that. They get to know people, they know what's behind them, they know what their interests are, and then they kind of help direct things their way that are going to fit their priorities.
Yeah. What do you think that most nonprofit leaders get wrong around fundraising or philanthropy?
Well, I think there's many things. One is they don't understand the fundamental nature of the landscape, which is that somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of all giving is from individuals, right? So they think, oh, grants are going to be the way to go, or big corporations are the way to go. And corporate support's fine, but it's roughly 6% of the US giving landscape. So if you put all this time and effort into thinking that this big company, so you're in Philadelphia areas, Comcast or
Mhm.
Aramark or some of the pharmaceutical companies, like, they're big billion-dollar companies, they'll support our work. They have very small philanthropic budgets, and they want to spread those across maybe as many people as they can. So how much are you really going to get from them? And that they have a lot of strings attached when it comes to corporate support. So I think people don't understand the lay of the land fully. That's one
Yeah.
thing. The second thing is, they think that just because people have a lot of resources, that they're going to give it to them.
Mhm.
And I think what we don't understand fundamentally is we have to make a case for ourselves. we have to demonstrate that investing in our organization is a wise investment. The people that have built significant resources are not in the business of throwing their money away. They want to understand that they're being strategic and smart about what they're doing. So I think what we maybe don't understand the importance of is building in a set of structures that enable us to demonstrate the impact of our work, to measure the impact of our work, so that we can share not only the sort of the mission of the work and the stories of our work, but we have some proof to back it up. Mm-hmm. And so they don't really understand that we can measure the impact of our work, and not having that data, I think, is a shortfall for many nonprofit organizations when it comes to fundraising.
Yeah. Yeah. You have some great advice for new leaders in this book, or leaders that are starting as a new CEO for a new nonprofit. You have a number of them. Maybe give us a few of them that you really think are pertinent, that people, if you're thinking about starting out at a new place, new organization, what do they need to have? What do they need to for sure know?
Well, it's the one question I asked everyone I interviewed in doing the book. And because I asked different people different questions depending on their background and the part of the book that they were contributing to. But then I asked everyone the same question: what advice would you give to new leaders? And so the last chapter is that compilation of a lot of those nuggets. And there's a couple that come to mind right away. The first is some version of a listening tour, that your job is not to come in day one and feel like you have all the answers. If what you should do, and the best way to build trust, is to go out and put yourself out there and say, you've been here, either as a staff member or as a partner or as a volunteer or a board member or a donor. What attracted you to the organization? What do we do well? Where do you think we can improve? And just, come up with a series of questions, simple questions, ask them, and start collecting the information. And just trying to gather perspectives. And what you're looking for are patterns, right? So you might hear, if you hear the same thing repeatedly from different people, then you could probably put a lot more weight behind that must be the truth, versus hearing it from one person and maybe that's just that one person's perspective. One opinion doesn't make anything. It's just one data point. But when the data points start lining up, it's time to pay attention. So I think the first, piece of advice is figuring out how to invest time on a regular basis, whether daily, weekly, monthly. I'm going to talk to our top 10 donors. I'm going to talk to each of our staff members, and be very intentional about that, and understand that that's not anything other than sort of accelerating your learning curve so that you can be effective in your job. But to think that you're going to come in day one with your own ideas about how to lead, you might have some of those ideas, but it's best to maybe just hold them back a little bit. Let's fortify our knowledge of the organization before we start making assumptions, because that's just a recipe for, not having a successful start, is if you start launching without the right perspective. So the listening tours are one. The second thing I put out there is this notion of creating a cohort of other leaders. I think the job, as I've talked to people, and as you've experienced as well, Jeff, I'm sure, is sometimes leaders of nonprofit organizations feel like it's a bit of a lonely job, and they don't really have the ability always to go talk to their staff about some of the concerns they have, because those are individuals that work for them. They don't always have the ability to talk to their board, because their board is in effect their boss. And so, and sometimes friends or partners at home don't fully understand or appreciate the work that they do, no fault of their own. So, being intentional about finding 2, 3, 4 other leaders that might be in your community, regardless of the size of the organization that they run, just that you can get together with and just sort of talk shop and talk things out in a sort of a non-judgmental environment. To just, sometimes it's good to understand that other people are having the same challenges that you're having, and you're not alone. Or they're also going to have some good advice. Hey, I've run into that, and here's what I did. And sometimes that's just what we need to have a little bit more confidence to move forward. So I guess the first two things I would say is go on a listening tour and find some other people to connect with on a regular basis, so that you can have a little bit more of a community and support for yourself.
David, I think that second one where you're talking about you need that community around you that you can get advice from is so important. I mean, just in life in general, right? Not just, but You do a lot of consulting with nonprofit leaders now. How is that a problem that you see? Are Do you see a lot of leaders kind of out there on their own and they do feel lonely and they don't have that connection? How do you get that if you don't have it?
Well, there's a couple of ways to get different things. I've seen, I recently joined a group called the Nonprofit Hive, which is a community of nonprofit leaders who are just, connecting, and it's basically sort of a one-off conversation each week. You get to meet a new person in the sector, and you learn about them, they learn about you. And Tasha Van Black has done an incredible job of building the Nonprofit Hive, and I encourage people to check
Is
it out.
that, and that's national, right?
It's global,
Global.
and it's free, and it's a great way to meet new folks. I've started becoming. I think people can become more intentional on LinkedIn and find people whose language and approach resonates with them, and then begin to dialogue with them. And people are very open to having a virtual coffee and doing other things. I see what you had to say. I really like your approach, and then you can just sort of like feed off of that a little bit more. So there are communities that are out there, and sometimes you have to just get out of your own office. So whether it's going to a conference or doing something else, I meet people all the time in very unintentional ways.
Mhm.
I'm out walking my dog, and what do you do? And I do this, like, oh my gosh, this person I know runs a nonprofit organization. So you're not going to meet people if you stay in your office, whether
Mhm.
that's in your home office or in the actual physical office if your organization has one. So I just think you have to find a way to get out of your comfort zone and get out of your space. That's where the other people are. So and again, I think we have to be intentional about our time and blocking that out on our calendars, because we don't have extra time. We have to prioritize our time. And so if we just do it with the extra time, that extra time is never going to occur. We have to elevate it enough so that it says, no, 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 no. I'm going to do this on Friday from X to Y because it's important. And then it's something you do, just like having a meeting with anyone else on your calendar.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I've heard you say that running a nonprofit is like running a business. How so? How does that work? How does that work?
Well, I mean, we're in this business of helping people ultimately. So that's our core service. We're trying to make a difference with a certain population of people. Okay. That's sort of like square one. And in order to do that, we have to do certain things. We have to have good people on our team. So we have to hire people. We have to retain those people. We have to train those people. We have to keep them on board. All of those HR and team building things, that's a business function. That's not specific to the type of cause we have. But if we're going to get good people and we're going to really grow the organization, we need really capable people around us. That's just one area. We need revenue. So we need money coming in on a regular basis. Well, every business needs that. And to treat it as a business, you have to have an intentional approach. You just can't be running here or running there. You have to have a plan, and you have to be thoughtful about it. You don't have to get it perfect, but you have to have, a professional approach to generating revenue and other resources. So businesses do those types of things.
Mhm.
And then businesses sort of manage their costs and have a reasonable approach, how to budget and how to manage their money and how to keep track of it and make sure they're on track. Well, businesses do those things too. So if you're just kind of coming into this with your hair on fire to try to, help the world and drive your program and things of that nature, that's great. That's totally fine. That's a reasonable way to enter the sector
Mhm.
and to enter, the world, and to be a good human wanting to help other people. Great. But you just need all of these other competencies and perspectives in order for that fundamental program, the mission that you're trying to achieve, for it to be successful, for it to achieve its full potential.
Yeah.
So I think, if we're looking to do something for a little while, you don't need all that stuff. If you're looking to be around for 3, 5, 10 years and build something that's going to last, then you need some of this other fundamentals in place so that your organization can thrive.
So one of the interesting things I saw in your book is this concept of co-CEO or co-executive director. Tell me about that and what are the benefits of that?
Yeah. So the co-CEO model is a little bit more of a new strategy and a new approach for some organizations. It's not that well adopted yet, but I've seen it and I keep seeing it more. And it solves for one of the big challenges that organizations have, which is not having a succession plan. We might have, a leader, the leader moves on, then big panic, big scramble to fill those shoes, and the organization is in a state of turmoil. So sometimes having a co-CEO model sort of mitigates that risk. If you have two people that you have really developed and given a lot of the same responsibilities to, we'll talk about in a moment how they might divide those up. But by definition, if you have two people at that level and one of them moves on, now you're in a position of backfilling in a co-CEO while there's still somebody in place that can
Mm.
keep the organization running smoothly. So that's one general thought. The other thing is it really can be a reflection of the needs of the organization. So the bigger the organization, sometimes the idea that one person can lead the whole thing, it really might replace this idea of having a chief operating officer or something of that nature. Now, again, every structure can be different, but if there's co-CEOs, one might be a little bit more internal facing,
Hmm.
one might be a little bit more external facing, dealing with more of the fundraising and the board and some of those partnerships and things that are out there. And then one of the other CEOs is dealing with more staff and internal and structure and all of that stuff, which for the bigger organization is its own job. So
Hmm.
having these things working in tandem enables the organization to shoulder all of these responsibilities and burdens in a way that maybe matches the skills of the two individuals more effectively, and also, as I said, mitigates some of the risk. If you have somebody leading and then somebody leaving, then
Yeah.
you're left with the cupboard bare, and it's not that easy to just elevate somebody from a senior director role into an executive director role. Sometimes having a co-CEO model is a better sort of recruiting and
Yeah.
development strategy.
Yeah, I like this concept. I hope other nonprofits start using it because I could see from many nonprofits that I've worked with in the past that having a co-CEO who maybe has another skill set um, actually could be much more effective for the organization. Um, so
You know
that's
what?
that's
I
really
mean,
interesting.
the idea that here's the thing, Jeff. Let's just sort of like boil it down. All of us aren't great at everything.
Right.
Okay. The notion that we've seen job descriptions for executive directors, 38 bullet points long. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sorry, but those aren't real people. Those are fantasy people that somebody's going to be good at every one of these things.
Yeah.
So I think we in general over over imagine and over expect out of individual roles. What we should do, if we're being fair to the organization and fair to ourselves, is what are the three or four things that are the guts of this job? And let's recruit for those things, understanding that other responsibilities as assigned,
Hmm.
so the catch-all
Yeah.
miscellaneous bucket
Yeah.
does exist. But this is what, when we think about you as a candidate, how are you going to know that I'm doing my job well 12 months from now, 24 months from now? What are you going to care about?
Yeah.
Then why don't we just talk about those things? Why don't we hire for that? Why don't we measure that? Why don't we support that? And then, yeah, other stuff's going to come along because that's just human nature. But don't make every job like you're, leading the free world. Like
Yeah.
maybe just kind of simplify the recruiting, simplify the hiring, simplify the measurement of and performance evaluation so that we get the right people for the right roles and really try to boil that down and not make everything seem like so fantasy land. Because
Yeah.
I think it's overwhelming the expectations for so
Yeah.
many of these positions.
Yeah. I agree. Another chapter in your book that I really thought was interesting was around branding.
Mm.
And you have a history in branding. Uh, I would love, and as I was reading it, I was thinking, well, what's the real difference between branding and building a culture in the organization? So I'd love to hear that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, positioned that way. I mean, I teach nonprofit branding. I worked at Procter and Gamble, sort of the founders in many ways
Yeah.
of brand management, right? So I have a branding lens, and to me, branding is how other people perceive and experience a a product, or an organization. So it's really how the outside world understands us.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to deal with how we message, how we respond, how we act, how we show up for the community. Culture, to me, is a little bit more of an internal thing. Like how do we work together? What are our values? And clearly there can't be a disconnect between the brand and the culture. That wouldn't make any sense. But
Right.
I think culture is a little bit more internal, and branding is a little bit more external.
Okay.
And that's how I would, make the simple delineation between those two.
So in my history in fundraising, I had I did like 12 years of direct response fundraising. So, we'd work with large nonprofits and build their donor files through mail, television, radio, online, anything that's going to elicit a direct response,
Yep.
and build the donor base. And we get in these arguments with the communications team of the nonprofit because they wanted to spend $1 million on branding, and we wanted to spend $1 million on new donor acquisition. So we're like, how do we're trying to build a donor base versus kind of showing the world about who we are and what it feels like to be who we are. So I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because back in those days, I was like super anti-brand person and more like, let's build the donor base and that's your brand. But over the years, I've mellowed out on this, and I'm more like a yes and versus an either or.
Right. So I think that's the answer. And I mean, we have to be doing both things as an organization. And I don't know that it has to be a forced choice. I mean, I appreciate the nature of the question, but I was always taught this answer in business school. The answer to every question is it depends. Okay. So it depends on the organization and its situation. If I were sitting here in more of a budget crisis, then branding is the long game.
Yeah.
Okay. Branding is, how do we show up in the minds of potential donors? How do we show up in the minds of our volunteers and our community and things of that nature? And those investments pay dividends, but they tend to pay them down the road. Fundraising, however we define fundraising, is more of a short-term activity. It doesn't mean there aren't long-term implications, but if I need to fill a funding gap, I'm not going to do it by building my brand. I'm going to do it by getting out and talking to people, whether it's through direct mail or digital communications or one-on-one cultivations. But I'm going to be talking to people, and I'm going to be telling them, not we're in trouble, we need money. And what I'm going to tell them is, this is the impact we are having on the community, and we want to continue to grow our impact. People don't like to support a sinking ship. They might do it once, but they're not going to keep going, throwing good money after bad. What they want to do, though, is be on a winning team. And winning teams are making a difference and showing up in the right ways for people. And so I think we always need to remind people of our impact and the positive way we are changing the community. And by doing that, we are building our brand and fundraising at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think if we can really figure out how to become better storytellers and how to weave that into the work we're doing, we can accomplish both sides of that coin and not make it an either or situation.
Okay, so you were a nonprofit leader for 12, 15 years. Tell me, what did you love about it, and what were some of the challenges you had that other people that are listening right now could resonate with?
I think what I loved the most was interacting with the people that were supporting our work and benefiting from our work. So we provided new and gently used baseball and softball equipment to kids and communities in need. And we did that here in the United States and around the world. And so some of the most rewarding things were when a 12-year-old boy had collected all this equipment from his community, and he and his family would drive it to our warehouse, which was outside of Philadelphia, and they would deliver the stuff, and then we would receive it. We would give them a tour of our facility and give them a sense for where their equipment was going to go, like that they were going to have a material impact on a community that had suffered from a natural disaster or from a school program that we were supporting in some part of the country or the world. So there was that side. But then on the other side, just seeing the difference we were making with a community. And again, I'm thinking specifically about Hurricane Sandy after that devastated so much of the New York New Jersey area, and we were able to deliver equipment that was able to put kids back on the field doing something that, made them feel like they were doing something normal, and after their whole lives had been turned upside down. Being part of that was really, really incredible,
Mhm.
and a real privilege. So that's on the positive side. Like that's the good stuff. Like seeing the difference you're making in the world. And I think one of the things we do as leaders is we're so busy, we're in meetings and we're doing this and we're doing that. We get a little detached from our work.
Mm. Mhm.
And I think one of the things that leaders can benefit from, and it's also in the advice chapter, is this notion of get out there in your programs. Don't stay away from the work you're doing. Get your board members out there, get yourself out there. Don't get disconnected from the real difference that you're making, because we all know we're busy, but if we don't have that, if we don't have that constant reinforcement of all the good we're doing, we can kind of get pulled down by all of the challenges from the work, because the work can be very challenging. And I don't know what my biggest challenges were. I mean, they were different based on the time frames that I was in, but I felt like um, trying to recruit board members was really something that was an ongoing challenge. Sort of trying to
Mhm.
find the very, very best, the right people for our work, was something I spent a lot of time and energy on. And when you did it, it made a huge impact. So it
Mhm.
was, you were really looking for one or two people a year that could really move the needle. And so that's a lot of work for not a lot of, to show for it in some respects. It's only one or two people, but they can totally change the energy and the trajectory of the organization. So on the risk reward, on the investment versus yield side, that was a big challenge, but it was always something that was worthwhile, because when you found those people, they made a special impact on the organization.
Yeah. Now you also had this unique thing happen where you founded the organization and now you've left it. You've done something, you're doing something different. What was that process like for to take something that you birthed and then let it go?
Yeah, I mean, 15 years was a long time, and I think things had sort of run their course, and so it was. There were so many people that were capable of taking the organization, which had a really strong foundation, and moving it forward. I felt very comfortable moving on, and so that really wasn't. I thought it would be a little bit more emotional than it ended
Mhm.
up being. I also had left the Philadelphia area and moved to New York, and people. I was sort of in a remote work environment when people weren't working
Mhm.
remotely yet, and so that transition was also a little bit easier, because my life had moved to New York and the organization wasn't leaving the Philadelphia area. So
Mhm.
I think there were some natural sort of constraints that sort of made the transition a little bit easier.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask you about is for the long-term success of a nonprofit leader, what do you feel that leader needs if they're going to be in this for the long haul? Like, what do they really need to be
I
successful?
think there's some traits that and I don't have this in any particular priority order. I think you need to be a problem solver, a creative problem solver. Things change. We're resource constrained. We need to, sometimes we're given a lemon, we got to make lemonade. And so having that mindset that like whatever plan A was is probably not going to happen. Now we're on to plan B, then there's plan C, and you've got to be able to roll with the punches a little bit. If you're a person that likes things to be super neat and super orderly and always go to form, it's probably not for you. So I think that side of it, sort of related to that, is resilience. You have to have a certain sense of being able to have disappointments, whether it's a donor that goes away, or a staff member that leaves, or things of that nature. And you've got to be able to quickly land back on your feet, not just for yourself, but for the organization. You can't reflect being down and troubled, and because that's contagious and that's not that healthy for the organization. So there needs to be a certain sense of resilience, and sort of maybe related to that, a certain sense of optimism, a notion that things are going to work out. This is a setback. You can call it that. You shouldn't deny that it is, because otherwise you're just being delusional. We've lost a big donor. That's unfortunate. But here's the good news. We have 4 or 5 other people that we're in the process of talking to. And I have a great feeling at least one of those is going to come through. So, let's keep pushing with what we're doing, and let's see if there's anything we could learn from the situation where the donor left. If it's something we did, we need to correct that. If it's just the natural course of things, it was a 3-year commitment they made and who knows what. But I mean, I think we need to be resilient. We need to be problem solvers. We need to be optimistic. And then the other thing is, I think we need to be, generally speaking, as I said, good listeners. I think we need to feel like, sometimes maybe people expect us to have all the answers, and because we have the title that we're supposed to be in charge and we're supposed to have it all figured out, we don't always have it all figured out. And so having a culture or building a culture where asking other people and truly wanting to get their perspective because they can help the organization, and you don't have to have all that weight. I think if you feel all the weight on yourself for too long, that's just a burden, and that's going to wear you down. So spreading that around and understanding that you have more support around you and building a culture that creates that support, I think can help with longevity.
Yeah. Well, I want everyone to get this book. Passion Isn't Enough. Keep it on your desk. You might read it once a month, once a week. It's going to come up. Something's going to come up around the nonprofits leadership space. If you're running your nonprofit, this book has the guide. It is the guide. I mean, I've had it on my desk for a week now, and I've already picked it up twice, separate from preparing for this podcast, to like, well, what would I do? Because I've been running into situations, other nonprofit leaders have been saying like, I'm not sure what to do. And I was like, wait a minute, I got a guide here, and it's going to get used. So I really think that if you want to have these indispensables, these things you need to know about your nonprofit, you really should get the book. And David, how do people get a hold of it?
People can get a hold of the book easily. It's wherever books are sold online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc.
Okay.
I'm David Rhode, Rhode. The book is Passion Isn't Enough, a practical guide for nonprofit leaders. So it's very easy to find, and it's easy to find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with people. I'm always willing to have a conversation and learn more about what they're doing. And Jeff, I have an offer to any organization, which I've made since the book has come out. But if leaders get the book for their whole board, I'm happy to Zoom into a board meeting and answer questions that the board may have. So, people have taken me up on that, and I enjoy that dynamic and perspective. And so when people get the book, I'd love to continue to hear from them and get their feedback, because I hope it is making the difference that it was intended to have.
That's very generous of you. And I hope people take you up on it. That'd be awesome. Well, thank you for joining me today, and David, and thank you for being a guest with me. And it's been awesome to hear your story and give some good advice to folks. And we'll see you next time.
Jeff, thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.